What if confidence alone could change your entire life? This is Frank Abagnale Jr. At only 15 years old, he left home and survived by fooling everyone. Over the years, he successfully passed himself as a pilot, a doctor, and an attorney, stealing millions of dollars, dated models, and had all the luxuries simply because he understood one thing. If you look convincing, you can open any door you want. In a prison in France, an FBI agent named Carl comes to take Frank Abagnale Jr. back to America. Carl was talking to him when suddenly Frank's health started getting worse. At first, Carl thought this is one of Frank's tricks, but then he realized that no one could fake it so well. He quickly started taking him to the hospital, but Frank, seeing the chance, tried to run away from there too. However, the police caught him, and after that, we are shown his story from the beginning. Frank was born into a very happy family. His parents loved each other deeply. His father was also named Frank, and his French mother, Paola. He's very close to them, but especially to Frank, his father, a successful businessman who's raising him to become someone important. Frank admires him for everything he's achieved, marrying an amazing woman, the company he owns, and being admired by everyone. After his father receives an honorary distinction, they return home and continue celebrating. Frank's father recounts how he met Paola in a town in France. He watches them and smiles. The next morning, Frank's father abruptly wakes his son to accompany him to a very important appointment in the city. He dresses Frankie in a black suit and then arrives at a bank. The boy, pretending to be his chauffeur, stops in front of the entrance, and Frankie's father instructs him not to move the car and to wait there. Even if he gets a ticket, the man wants to give the appearance of being someone important. Frankie asks what's all this about, and his father responds with another question. You know why the Yankees always win, Frank?
It's because the other teams can't stop staring at those damn pinstripes.
The dialogue simply means that the Yankees always win because the opposing team is so distracted by the uniforms worn by the Yankees, in this case, the pinstrips, that they are unable to focus on playing good baseball. It's not the strength of the players, it's the deception of the uniform that wins the day. There's actually a whole study of sports on how teams and players use things like this to win. This is using deception as a tool to win the battle. Just like Sun Tzu says in his book, The Art of War, all warfare is based on deception. What Frank's father is really explaining is that people constantly judge value without even realizing it. In most societies, qualities like status, money, and attractiveness shape the way others perceive you. Because of that, anyone who has those traits or can convincingly project them often receives better treatment, more trust, and more opportunities. Right after this conversation, Frank's father goes to the bank hoping to secure a loan, but he's been rejected because he's under investigation for tax fraud. He argues that it isn't criminal, that he simply made a mistake and needs financial help, yet no one is willing to give him a chance. In the end, with no other option left, he sells his car instead. Financial problems persist, and the Abagnale family is forced to move to a smaller house. Paola leaves their home in tears. However, Frank, the father, continues to do everything he can for his son. On his 16th birthday, as a gift, he opens a checking account in his name with $25 and gives him a checkbook, telling him that one day he'll need to buy something. The next day, Frankie attends his new school, a public school, wearing the uniform from his previous private school because, well, what else could he wear? The class bully greets him with a shove, and in the classroom mocks his uniform, commenting that he looks like a substitute teacher. This gives Frankie the idea to pretend to be exactly that. So he begins giving instructions firmly and confidently, and everyone believes he's the teacher.
Excuse me, people, if I need to ask again, I'm going to write up the entire class. Take your seats!
Later, he takes the opportunity to humiliate the bully by asking him to read in front of the class. Later, the principal calls Frankie's parents and informs them that their son has been impersonating a substitute teacher for a week. He was even planning a school trip. The two apologize, and as they leave, Frank notices that his mother's angry, but his father, on the other hand, laughs at his joke, making him see that what he has done has been very clever and funny. If we are very observant, we see that the father begins to invent a life he doesn't have. He tries to hide from his son that there are no financial problems at home. His father, who's no stranger to cunning people, with Frank Jr. sometimes serving him as his accomplice. Dreaming of power and money, Frank Sr. lives an unaffordable lifestyle, which eventually catches up with him, resulting in the family losing their big house and moving into a much smaller apartment in the wake of an IRS investigation. This is very important because this is how the foundation of the personality that Frank will acquire to build his empire. One day, when Frank came home, he saw another man in his mother's bedroom. That man used to work with his father. His mother tried to act like nothing was going on, and even gave Frank some money saying, "Take this and buy something for yourself." Frank had understood everything. A nervous Paula begs him not to say anything and offers him money later. The teenager returns home to find his parents and a lawyer there. They're getting a divorce. Frank was heartbroken, watching his family fall apart in front of his eyes. He couldn't bear it anymore. They ask him to choose which parent he wants to live with, but the boy can't make a decision. He runs away and buys a train ticket using the checkbook his father gave him. He also uses it to pay for a hotel, but after a few days and 2 bounced checks because he doesn't really have any money, he's kicked out in the middle of the night. This is when we begin to see Frank's tremendous brain capacity develop certain skills effortlessly. Frankie has to come up with something if he wants to survive. Since he's underage, he starts by changing his birthday to get a loan. He tries to charm the bank employee with different tactics, but he gets rejected by every bank. However, as he leaves one of these banks, he sees a pilot get out of the taxi with several beautiful flight attendants. Frankie follows them and is fascinated by how people respect him. Then he gets an idea. He poses as a student writing an article and interviews a professional firm, Pan Am, to learn everything he needs to know about pilots. Afterward, he calls uniform suppliers in Pan Am, pretending to be a co-pilot who lost his uniform. He gets one made to measure, but also has a charge to the company by giving a fake payroll number so that the uniform is charged to the company itself. Frankie sends a letter to his father, telling him that he decided to become an airline pilot and promises to help him recover everything, thus being just a teenager pretending to be a pilot. After this, Frank went to the bank to cash his check. The same bank that earlier ignored him. Now, the manager himself came forward and cashed the check personally. Later, Frank learned from a hotel that he could cash bigger checks too, not just small ones, as long as they look like salary checks. So Frank started making his own fake salary checks. He would remove the airline company logo from a toy plane and pasted it onto the check. Then, when he went to the bank, those who once rejected him now adore him and treat him like a star. Little by little, Frank creates more forged checks and makes more money. After a couple of times, Frank realized he could now get his checks cashed anytime at the airport. The receptionist there even asked him if he was flying with them that day. When Frank said yes, she immediately took him inside the plane. Sitting in the plane was free for pilots. Frank was not a real pilot, so he was scared inside, but he still acted very confident in front of everyone. He then went up to a beautiful air hostess and impressed the girl with the necklace trick he learned from his father, which turned out to be a very successful trick with the girl. In real life, Franklin managed to travel to 82 countries for free in the fold-down seat of the cockpit. Frank has managed to deceive everyone because he has learned that people tend to treat you as they see you, and if they see you as an authority figure, all the better. Because there's a principle of authority that indicates that people tend to listen to and believe authority figures without questioning them, and Frankie managed to get their impression of authority, first as a teacher and now as a pilot, thanks to 2 main elements. First, confidence. These figures are firm and confident and transmit this with their body and language and tone of voice, making people confirm that what they see is true. And second, the uniform. Titles, ranks, and uniforms are visible manifestations of authority. When people see Frankie in his uniform, they assume his credibility and indulge him in everything because they also have a lot to lose. If they don't treat someone important well, they risk losing their job. Frankie also used other complementary techniques, such as distracting people at precise moments by appealing to their sympathy. For example, when cashing out a check, the moment a young cashier checks it, he tells her that her eyes are beautiful.
Excuse me, I'm sure you hear this all the time, but you have the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen.
Frankie was now enjoying life to the fullest. He even started flirting with the bank manager and slowly began understanding the entire system, where the checks came from, where they went, how account numbers were assigned. I've learned everything. He also found out the banks used a special typewriter to encode checks, so he bought a second-hand typewriter of the same kind. Frank was no longer a beginner. His work had become very professional. Gradually, he started withdrawing more and more money using fake checks, and his frauds grew bigger and bigger. News of his activity reached the FBI, and the case was assigned to an agent named Carl, who took his work very seriously. He's divorced, and has a daughter he hasn't seen in a long time because she lives with his ex-wife. Frankie just wants to reunite with his family, whose breakup in his eyes he attributes to financial problems. So one afternoon, he invited his father to lunch at a very elegant restaurant and told him about what he was doing these days. Frank's father believed his son had truly become a pilot and felt very proud of him. Frank told him since the government took everything from him, he bought him a car, the same one James Bond drives in the movies, so he can go and get back with his mom. But his father said he can't take it, as the tax authorities are still after him. If I take this car, they'll just take it away too. His father's store had also closed, and he was going through tough times. Frank even offered him money, but he refused, saying he could not take money from his son. It could be argued that by leaving his old life behind at the age of 16, Frank did not just run away from home, but also from the truth he simply could not come to terms with. The fact that his idyllic family life, the one he romanticized and grown so attached to, was but a mere facade. Therefore, one of the reasons why he managed to become such a master of deception was that he started out as a master of self-deception. Each time Frank reinvents himself, he gets to live out a fantasy of his own making, one where he is the one seemingly in control of the narrative. By doing so, he tries to compensate for the lack of stability and the accompanying terror of helplessness, both of which rear their ugly heads when our protagonist is forced to choose between his two parents. In declining to make the choice, he goes with a third option of his own making, one that enables him to be the master and commander of his own destiny. And this gives him both agency and a new objective, to become enough and to earn enough so that his parents could reunite.
Everything they took from us, I'm gonna get it back.
Instead of dealing with the pain of having his illusion of a picture-perfect family destroyed and making hard choices rooted in reality which parents live with, a choice which would only confirm and reinforce the shattering of said illusion, he decides to create a new make-believe, one in which he has both the power and the means to bring his family back together again, one in which he's not a helpless kid. It's as if Frank pressed pause the day he ran away and decided to exercise control, thinking that if he just got back all the money and status that was lost, he and his parents would simply pick up where they left off.
Don't have to worry. I'm gonna get it all back now, Daddy. I promise. I'll drive on over to Mom's house, pick her up, take a little joyride.
This notion is both sad and touching, seeing as how children tend to take out the burden of unprocessed family trauma, feeling as if they were the ones responsible for fixing the family problem, and believing that they could actually accomplish the task if they just tried hard enough. By now, Frank had understood the whole system of the country very well. He would go to different states and pass checks from different places. The FBI was keeping on a close watch on all of his activities, and soon they tracked him to the hotel where he had passed his last check. When they asked at the hotel, they found out that Frank was still staying there. He had been there for so long that he was now familiar with everyone at the hotel. Carl went straight to Frank's room with a gun. Frank realized that if he didn't act smart, he would be caught, so he started pretending to be an undercover agent.
Roll envelopes addressed to himself.
Put it down! Drop it!
Relax! You're late.
With great confidence and composure, he tells them that he's Barry Allen, and that these people are from the Secret Service, and that they already captured the forager. Carl lowers his guard, but still demands identification. Frankie hands over his wallet, but before Carl can open it, the young man goes to the window and asks him to look out to see that his partner has indeed taken the criminal away, and see a man escorting an elderly man into the car. This is enough to convince him. So Frankie picks up all his things he used to make checks and leaves while the officer has Frank's wallet, while he takes some of his belongings as evidence to analyze. After some seconds go by, he then checks the wallet and discovers that there's only stickers and stamps. He's been tricked, and when he looks at the window, Frank is already fleeing. Carl takes this humiliation as something personal. This incident would be the beginning of a cat and mouse game. Slowly, the airline started finding out about the way Frank pretended to be a pilot. Now, it has become a little difficult to keep doing the same scam again. When the press came to know about him, they gave Frank the nickname of the James Bond of the sky. Frank was very happy with this. He started wearing suits like James Bond and even bought a car like him. This gives him a high status. Frank is at the point where he stays in luxury hotels, where he runs into very famous models whose pictures boys at his school used to have it in their lockers. Because of his suit and car, she tells him she can give him an autograph in her room, showing us how the image of the wealthy man opened doors that boys Frankie's age could only fantasize about. But in the world of superficial images, not everything is as it seems. Since the girl doesn't do anything for free, she asks him for a check for $1,000, and since there's nowhere to cash it, she takes a check for $1,400 and also gives Frankie the remaining change in cash. Catch Me If You Can plays with a painful idea. People rarely see who you are first. They see the story you successfully project. Frank gets respect, luxury, attention, and an intimacy, not because people know him, but because they believe in the image. Pilot, doctor, lawyer, wealthy man. The famous model scene makes that especially clear. He lives what seems like every young man's fantasy, yet the whole movement is hollow because it's built on performance. And the twist, that even she is also selling an image and changing for the encounter, reinforces the same theme. Everyone is acting, packaging themselves, and trading appearances for value. The film suggests that status often opens doors before a character ever does. People respond to confidence, symbols, beauty, uniforms, fame, and money. Society rewards appearances so quickly that sometimes the illusion becomes more powerful than reality itself. But beneath all the glamour, Frank is deeply lonely. That's the real tragedy of the movie. When people love the mask, you never know if anyone would stay for the real person underneath. And the film shows us exactly that in the following scene. On Christmas Eve, the stubborn Carl is working alone when he suddenly receives a call. It's Frankly apologizing for having deceived him earlier and inviting him to meet him at a hotel. So Frank tells him the name of the hotel where he's staying and the room number, which is 3113. He doesn't take it seriously and knows it's a trap. The agent assures him that he knew it was him, to which Frankie replies,
"Oh, people only know what you tell them, Carl."
When Frankie says he has to leave, he then tells the boy that he's only calling him because he has no one else on Christmas Eve, and Frankie hangs up the phone angrily.
No one else to call.
While the officer laughs, that laughter only masks his own reality. Although Frankie is so desperate in his loneliness that he calls him despite the risk involved, he immerses himself on his own work because, like the boy, he wants to escape the loneliness caused by being far from his family. The two have more in common than they think. After this, Frank leaves his room, and the camera shows us the room number 3113, which tells us that Frank was indeed telling the truth and did want someone to talk on Christmas Eve. The two scenes, first the night with the model and then the call without directly telling us, shows us the loneliness that Frank feels, because behind all the luxuries and the women, he really has no one. The next day, the name Barry Allen, which Frank had given him when he tricked him, was revealed to be the identity of the superhero, Flash. And he realized that Frank was just a child. Carl called the office and told him to make a list of children who had run away from home. Someone must have filed a missing report, he said. After a long investigation, Carl finally reached Frank's house where he met Frank's mother. And Paula, who ended up marrying Jack, her ex-husband's friend who now lives in a big house, goes to the agents and gives them a photo of her son so they can identify him and get his name. Paula tells them that she'll pay them $20 for the mischief her 17-year-old son has done, and Carl tells her that it won't be enough to reach the $4 million that Frank has scammed so far. Meanwhile, the young man is living the high life and using his money to throw parties. At one of these parties, a friend of his is in an accident, and he has gone to see him at the hospital. There, he meets a young nurse named Brenda, with whom he quickly connects emotionally. Frankie is tired of running away and wants to find someone to settle down with, and it seems that Brenda could be that person, and being a pilot has become too dangerous, so he poses as Dr. Connors instead, forging a Harvard degree and manages to get a supervisory job at the same hotel. How was he able to deceive everyone in a profession that requires practical knowledge? Using a technique many superiors employ to mask their incompetence or delicate tasks by creating competition. When he's tasked with supervising a case and faced with the challenge of demonstrating his knowledge, which he lacks, he asks one of the students what they think needs to be done, then asks another if they agree. If both concur, he gives the instruction. If not, he makes them debate until they reach an agreement. He does all of this in a way that makes the student feel like they're on probation, exploiting their fear of failing, and thus forcing them to do the work for them. All of this while he seems pretty confident, but in reality, he was feeling very sick. Meanwhile, people visit Frank's father and realize where the boy inherited his cunning personality. The father deflects all the questions about his son, but before leaving, Carl sees the letter Franklin has been sending and notes the address. However, upon arriving at the location, they find it empty. Although Carl manages to see the forged medical degree, if Frankie doesn't do something, he'll be caught at the hospital. Frank and Brenda's affection blossoms. He loves her innocence and honesty. He sees in her the opportunity to leave his old life behind and finally settles down. So, the boy proposes that they agree to meet with their parents. Frank learns that Brenda's father is a lawyer, so at the meeting, he mentions that before becoming a doctor, he practiced law for a year and then wants to return to it. Hearing this, Brenda is thrilled and asks her father to let Frankie work for him, but he finds it very strange that a guy like Frankie would want to marry his daughter. He seems too good to be true. So alone, he asks the young man who he is and what he really wants, to which Frank replies, "I'm not a doctor, nor a lawyer, nor an airline pilot. I'm nothing really. I'm just a guy in love with your daughter." But luckily for him, Brenda's father misinterprets this as something poetic and gives him his blessing. So Frankie passes the Louisiana State Bar exam and starts working with his future father-in-law, while Carl goes to the hospital to catch him. But the office is already empty. The kid is always one step ahead. In a scene set in the future, after Carl has arrested Frank, he asks him how he passed the bar exam. Frank replies that it makes no difference if he's going to spend many years in a prison anyway. Even though Carl asks him for half a dessert to tell him how he did it, they don't reach an agreement. In real life, to pass the exam, Frankie studied for months and had to take it 3 times until he passed without cheating. He then worked for a year as a corporate lawyer, winning several cases. This shows how truly astute he is, and that behind all those tricks, there is a very capable person. One night, while spending time with Brenda's family, Frankie feels a little bittersweet when he sees everyone having a good time, especially his in-laws, happy together. It reminds him of his broken family, promoting him to seek out his father at a bar, who now works at the postal office after the IRS seized everything, tells him he's getting married and that he doesn't have to worry anymore. He's going to recover everything the government took from them and bring his mother back. The son asks if Paula had already seen him in that uniform. The father, a little resigned and sad, says yes. But Frank tells him it doesn't matter. Everything will be alright. But his father tells him that Paula married Jack in a mansion in Long Island. This devastated the boy, as his dreams of seeing his family reunited is shattered. Before leaving, Frankie tells his father he wants to stop running away, but Frank encourages him to continue. And looking at Frank, we see that he doesn't have many masks left to wear. As a sociologist, Evan Goffman says, we all wear social masks necessary to live with others. But Frank has crossed the line. He's become dependent on constantly pretending to be someone he's not in order to avoid facing reality. The only reason Frank does all this is because he couldn't accept his parents' divorce, because he saw the father he so admired in poverty. Christmas Eve arrives again, and once more, Frank calls Carl. He tells him he wants a truce because he's getting married soon and wants to settle down. He's tired of running.
Please leave me alone, Carl. Please.
However, Carl rejects him. He assures Carl that he'll catch him. With this information, he has a new lead. If Frank is going to get married, he'll use the last name Connors, because Brandon knows him by that name. So, searching for engagement announcements, he manages to find the event. When Frank sees Carl's coming, he retreats to his room with Brenda, and there he tells his fiancée the whole truth. He had been fooling people all along, but he assured her that he truly loved her, and that they could live together for the rest of their lives without worry. Then, before escaping through the window, he instructs her to meet him at the airport in 2 days. And right after, Carl enters the room, but Frankie has left him once again. 2 days later, Frank waits for Brenda at the airport. He sees her and is happy, but is immediately disappointed to see that she wasn't alone. Agents were with her. It becomes very difficult for Frank to escape. Then he came up with a clever idea. He invents a fake flight attendant recruitment program at a nearby university and intends to offer internships to 8 young beautiful women. Carl, meanwhile, knows the boy will return to the airport, so he waits for him with 100 men. But Frank arrives at the airport dressed as a pilot and accompanied by the beautiful flight attendants, completely distracting everyone's attention. The phrase, "Why do the Yankees always win?" perfectly executed. Frank easily slipped away. At the same time, a boy who looked like Frank was standing outside the airport with a car. All the FBI agents ran to catch him, but when caught, the boy said he's just a driver and someone had just paid him money to stand there dressed like that and picked someone. This way, Frank cleverly escaped from the country.
Who you picking up? Pack up, let's fly away!
7 months later, he committed huge frauds in many countries all over the world. The FBI tried searching for the boy, except for Carl, who refused to give up. He realized that Frank makes checks so perfect they're undetectable, so he consults with the experts about what kind of machine could produce them. They tell him it must have been one widely used in France. This leads him to recall that Frankie's mother mentioned a town in France where she met Frank's father. So he heads to that town, and on Christmas Eve, he locates Frankie in a factory producing hundreds of checks. The fact that the boy had settled in a town where his parents met could be seen as an attempt to recreate the home he lost, which in this context isn't just a physical place, but a state of being, a feeling of security and belonging. It's where his parents fell in love, where his family began, and by living there, Frankie may be trying to recapture something that lost happiness and unity. That frightened and exhausted boy is happy to see Carl, a familiar face. He mentions that they always talk on Christmas Eve, a celebration often seen as a time for family bonding, since it's usual for them to always talk on this date. If there ever was a testament to Frank being a child, that is one. The other one is a desire to find a father figure, which he finds in none other than Carl. In Frank's eyes, the fact that the FBI agent plays along by chasing him implies that he cares. Just as children need to feel that the adults in their lives are willing to co-inhibit their reality, which often includes games of pretend. So too does Frank need a grown-up to join in on his elaborate game of cops and robbers. By doing so, Carl is not only acknowledging Frank's existence and confirming his importance, but also displaying affection. He cares enough to keep on pursuing him, or better yet, Frank made him give a damn, something he could never give his father to do. What is more, Carl symbolizes Frank's only outward touch with the reality of who he himself is, since all the other people in Con's man's life are not in relationship with him, but rather with whatever persona Frank is currently embodying. But Carl knows the truth of Frank, and is actually paying attention to him, not to one of the masks he so skillfully puts out, but to the mastermind behind the scenes, the kid making it all happen. And Carl is also in dire need of connection, being a divorced man who rarely sees his daughter, meaning that two unlikely companions have more in common than they would like to admit, both more than familiar with the feeling of loneliness. Frank and Carl immerse themselves each other in respective endeavors, Frank's being the cunning and running, and Carl's being the pursuing, trying to escape their internal voids. But the sad truth presents itself in the scenes depicting Christmas Eve, when Frank starts a new tradition by giving Carl a call from one of the hotels he's staying at. It is the first time Carl realizes that Frank is lonely, and we soon figure out that Carl is in the same boat, given the fact that he's more often than not the only one in the office, working on a holiday. Frank even gives Carl his exact location, but the agent just shrugs it off as another one of his cons. A part of Frank wants to get caught, because the totality of Frank yearns for connection and recognition. The agent appears worried and protective, and tries to convince Frankie to surrender, telling him that the French are angry because he humiliated them, and if he doesn't give up, they will kill him. Frank said, "Swear on your children." Carl Swirl said, "Believe me, I'm telling the truth." After this, Frank handcuffed himself, but when they stepped outside, there was no one. The very next moment, however, several police vehicles arrived and took the boy away.
Don't worry, Frank. I'll have you extradited back to the United States. Don't worry.
Frank is taken to the local prison, where he almost dies from terrible conditions. However, Carl finds a way to extradite the boy back to the United States. Throughout the story, Carl realizes that Frankie is just a runaway kid. It's for this reason that their relationship transforms into something resembling a father-son bond. Carl is divorced and far from his daughter, so Frank is the son he can be with. While Frank is a teenager desperately wanting to regain stability and a family, Carl is the family he once had, a representation of his father, who is also a divorced man with his son far away. On the plane, he receives the news that his father has died. The news breaks the boy, who goes to the bathroom to vent his grief, and then finds a way to escape through the toilet. He rushes to where his mother lives with Jack, but his last glimmer of hope vanishes when he sees that Paola has moved on with her life and now has a younger daughter. Without her father and with no possibility of getting his family back, Frank breaks down. And when the FBI arrives, Frank tells Carl to please get him out of there immediately. Frank was still less than 19 years old. Carl wanted him to be treated as a minor, but the government wanted the harshest punishment for such a huge crime. They decided he would rot in jail for 12 years, completely alone without talking to anyone. One day, Carl came to meet him. He gives him some comics and talks about frauds like Frank's were still happening. Frank examines the bank teller and quickly identifies him as being involved in the fraud. Impressed, the FBI begins calling him so that Frank can serve the rest of his sentence working for them. Under Carl's custody, the young man accepts, and after 5 years, he is released from prison and begins working. In real life, during his time in prison, the real Frank escaped through 3 times. On one of these occasions, he impersonated a prison inspector and walked right out of the front door. On his first day of work, everyone stares at him, and when he settles into the office, he's not very happy to see that he is given towers of documents to examine. Frank sees a pilot uniform at a roadside inn and remembers his past exploits. The weekend arrives, but sadness overwhelms Frank, as he's left without friends or family to support him. Since Carl also had to leave to Chicago to visit his daughter, just like when he found out his father had died. Or in all the events of his life, Frank is used to escaping and not facing reality as it is, without lies. So that weekend, he puts on the pilot's uniform to go flying, and told that if he escapes, his sentence will be increased. He adds that no one is after him anymore. If he plans to leave, he won't stop him, because he knows he will return. After this, the ancient leaves. Money arrives, and he nervously awaits Frank, who has not yet arrived. Carl waits for Frank to make the right decision and return, but he doesn't show up. Then, moments later, while dealing with a check issue, Frank arrives and tells him it's a fake. Carl, overjoyed and proud, looks at him and smiles. Even though it's not his son, he knows Frank's life story well, everything he's been through, and he knows that Frank isn't inherently bad. He just doesn't have someone to teach him how to face life's challenges. Alongside Carl, who truly knows himself behind the mask and lies, Frank finds solace in that loneliness and need for connection that was taken from him the day his family separated.